part of India Inc. is awaiting a Thatcherite Narendra Modi, a man who will work for smaller government and larger free enterprise. But recent statements of Mr. Modi and even parts of the BJP manifesto have spoken quite the contrary. Narendra Modi has nowhere spoken of cutting subsidies. On the contrary, he has spoken of finding the money to build infrastructure. Secondly, Mr. Modi has spoken of strengthening the public sector, thus diffusing hopes of divesting PSUs and finding money for building infrastructure.
मेरा मत है, अगर जो आज डूबा हुआ PSU है, उसके भी जो एम्प्लॉइज हैं, उनको अगर विश्वास में लिया जाए और उन्हीं के जिम्मे डाल दिया जाए, तो वो किसी प्राइवेट कंपनी से अच्छा चला के दिखाते हैं. इसलिए PSU के एम्प्लॉइज के प्रति आशंका करके निर्णय नहीं करने चाहिए. उनको अवसर देना चाहिए काम करने का, उनकी ताकत पे भरोसा करना चाहिए, उनको प्रोफेशनल मैनेजमेंट करने का तर्क अपॉर्चुनिटी देना चाहिए.
So, is India Inc. misreading the likely future Prime Minister? Well, I have with me two professors from his state, Gujarat, from his city, Ahmedabad, and from India's foremost educational institution, IIM Ahmedabad, Professor Ravindra Dholakia, who has written extensively on various aspects of Gujarat administration, and Professor T.T. Mohan, who teaches and writes about banking and macroeconomics at IIM Ahmedabad. Well, first up to you, Professor Dholakia, what has been Mr. Narendra Modi's dealing with subsidies in Gujarat?
He doesn't believe in subsidizing any activity where the returns are reasonable and where the private sector can really afford on its own. So that is not a question of going extra mile to provide subsidy. That is what he has not done. In fact, he has systematically reduced the subsidy, reduced the amount of subsidy. In fact, even the agriculturists are also made to pay the price for the electricity and the water in a reasonable sense. In fact, I was involved in the State Public Sector Reform Committee way back in 1998, and we had recommended reduction of the subsidy both in electricity and water. And I can tell you that after 2001, this has actually happened.
Okay, I take your point that Mr. Modi's running of the Gujarat administration gives us proof to believe that he will not extend the subsidies into water and into power, something like Arvind Kejriwal threatened to do in Delhi. And even now a large part of power is subsidized indirectly by bailout packages for distribution companies that might go. But Professor Ramon, just to get you into this conversation, how would you read Narendra Modi? Do you see him cutting the fertilizer bill, the food subsidy bill, or the fuel subsidy bill?
Well, it is a little difficult to sense where exactly the BJP and Mr. Modi stand on some of these issues, because not much can be gleaned from the manifesto. Anybody who has gone through the manifesto will have noticed that it deals mostly with generalities and doesn't get into the specifics of various issues. So, I mean, they talk about, funding infrastructure in a big way, but they don't tell us where the funding is going to come from. Secondly, Mr. Modi's own position on economic issues seems to be evolving over time as his political views have evolved. So if you look at what he was saying last year in last April, if I remember correctly, he was talking about small government and cutting subsidies and so on. More recently, in an interview with CNBC Awaz, he has spoken somewhat differently. So I think it's better to judge Mr. Modi by what he has actually done in certain areas rather than by looking at some of these pronouncements. And the second point I would make is that Mr. Modi may not necessarily replicate at the national level what he has done for Gujarat. My own reading of his recent comment on subsidies is that he may not substantially extend, as you pointed out, extend some of the welfare schemes, but I don't see him easily cutting back on some of these schemes, say including the rural employment guarantee scheme or even food subsidies. In fact, if you remember, the BJP's position on the Food Security Act was more aggressive than that of what was propounded in the bill passed by the Congress government, by the UPA government. So I don't see that he will necessarily reproduce at the national level some of the things which is done at the state level, and in fact Mr. Jaitley has also given similar indications that they don't necessarily favor the dismantling of some of these welfare schemes.
Fair point. Professor Rao, let me get Mr. Dholakia in on this issue. Where do you see, gleaning from the experience in Gujarat itself and his pronouncements, do you see him going towards the marketization of fuel prices, at least diesel, not necessarily kerosene? Do you see him coming to a market price of fertilizers?
In my opinion, he should be really moving towards the marketization and market-oriented things. Say, for the prices of the fuel, certainly I believe that he would rather try to implement whatever are the committee's recommendation, and these are committees after committees recommending the same things, similar things, and I think he would immediately try to start implementing those things. That is what I understand.
So you expect,
from the way in which he reacts.
Okay, market prices of fuel you expect will happen. Yeah. Do you expect that he will also turn to fertilizers and cut that subsidy in any meaningful fashion?
He might really restructure the subsidy in such a way that the subsidies don't go basically to finance the inefficiencies in the production. In fact, he might really restructure it to orient towards more to benefit the consumers rather than the producers. I think that is possible.
Professor Mohan, the three big subsidy elements we have is about 1.3 lakh crore on food subsidies. Do you see that getting trimmed under Narendra Modi? I am taking the least implication of the Food Security Act, as well a fuel subsidy bill of nearly 1 lakh crore, which of course is palmed off to the oil marketing companies. Do you see that getting reduced? And the fertilizer subsidy of, I think, between around 70,000 crores. Do you see any of these getting reduced in Mr. Modi's first or second year?
Well, it's really hard to take a call, as I said, on some of these specific elements, you know, how exactly we'll go about addressing subsidies and so on. But I think if you're looking at the broad approach, the philosophy which will inform the new government, say a Modi-led government, then it's useful to step back and see how exactly the Indian fisc has performed over a fairly long time. And you will see that the improvements in the fisc have happened mostly on the growth side, economic growth, plus more efficient collection of taxes, rather than through expenditure compression. So this is the broad story of Indian fiscal reform whenever it has happened. And my sense is that this will fit well into Mr. Modi's philosophy, you know, to bring about a change in the fisc through growth and, you know, improve taxes, rather than by cutting back on subsidies, which are likely to have a strong political backlash. So as I said, he may not extend the subsidy large.
I mean, growth certainly cannot be a 9-month wonder. So is there a chance that there is going to be a fiscal slippage in FY15 itself? Professor Dholakia.
No. I think he is very clear on some of these fiscal discipline criteria, and I don't expect him to slip as far as the fiscal discipline is concerned. If there are targets, and if he has to meet certain targets, he is bold enough to take certain measures. That is number one. Number two, as I am saying, and I tend to agree with Ram Mohan, that yes, I mean, by and large, it is the growth which has really brought in more revenues, and therefore there is no need as such for cutting the expenditure beyond a point. Now, you know, when we are talking about cutting the expenditure, it is a relative term. You don't increase the expenditure to the same extent to which the revenues increase. That is called cutting the expenditure.
Okay, I take your point that if revenues can grow fast and if subsidies remain at the same place, we still have a situation of a percentage share of subsidies falling. But Professor Ram Mohan, would you say that at least in the when the vote on account becomes a full budget in June or July, we are perhaps going to be faced with a fiscal deficit which will be higher, because you can't really increase the numerator in 9 months. You can't increase the revenue in 9 months. What is your best guess? Will the 4.6 or 4.5 promised in the vote on account simply willy-nilly increase to, 4.8 in the full budget which Modi may present?
Yeah, well, I would say that is very likely, if only because there has been so much fudging of the finances in the vote on account.
Yes.
So, I mean, the numbers are really not credible. So, if we end up with something higher than what was shown in the vote on account, that would not come as a big surprise. And I don't think Mr. Modi is out for some quick fixes. I think he will plan it out properly, and he will look for results to come, in a measured kind of way. And I don't think he or, even economic observers will be unduly worried about some slippage which may happen in June or July. I think that's only to be expected.
Okay. Well, while this will certainly be a solace in the long run if Narendra Modi is able to ensure more growth and therefore more tax revenues, for the banking system and for the bond markets, there is a 6 lakh crore borrowing program, which according to you both gentlemen can actually become a 6.5 lakh borrowing program if the subsidies increase. So the bombshell is there for 1 year. That's not a very pleasant conclusion, but we have to take a break at this juncture. We'll come back and discuss what can be Mr. Modi's attitude to the public sector and to divestment, two areas in which he may be able to make some money to meet his expenses. That discussion continuing after this break. Stay with us.